Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. We're rolling right into another Big East team preview. We have the Marquette Golden Eagles. If you are liking the content, please go ahead and like and subscribe. We do appreciate all the support you guys have given us this offseason. But diving right into it, right? Kam Jones, obviously, out the door. David Joplin, Stevie Mitchell, three guys that were all incredibly important to the success of Marquette, the last couple of seasons. Now they're gone, and, it's kind of a new era of basketball at Marquette now, especially with Iguodaro and Kolek gone a couple of years ago. It's just a whole new look, and as we know, Shaka doesn't really like to go to the portal, so he went straight freshman. We'll see what that brings for this team. But what do you see in this team offensively, Cody?
Yeah, I think the main strength is roster retention outside of losing, obviously, one of the best players in the country in Kam Jones and Joplin. But I think it's more continuity that I think is going to be the strength, and I think that's going to benefit them early in the season. But it's because everyone in the projected rotation has played at least some minutes for Shaka Smart before. So I think that it'll lead to a seamless transition into this season. And obviously Chase Ross and Sean Jones, who missed last season, are going to have a lot on their plate. But I do think they're at least ready for it from like a ball handling perspective and running in transition, which I think is a pretty main emphasis for the Shaka Smart offense. And I think another strength of this team would be the front court floor spacing and like I mentioned, overall ball security. I think that's always been an emphasis with Shaka Smart teams, at least since he got to Marquette. They've been top 30 nationally in turnover rate on the offensive end due to their guard heavy lineups and the depth that they typically have. And they might get a little bit worse in this area, but I think there's enough handling here to consider it a strength. And I think Royce Parham and Ben Gold are capable floor spacers who could be extremely valuable when it comes to opening up the floor for guys like Sean Jones and Chase Ross, who aren't like the greatest floor spacers, and they're more downhill drivers. I think that's more of their nature. And I think the pick and pop upside of those two, and I do think they play a lot of minutes next to each other. I think that'll open up some driving lanes for these guards, like even guys like Zayd Lowry and Demarius Owens, Trey Norman coming off the bench. I think every guard on this roster, I think it's their nature to play fast and get downhill, and I think those two guys in Parham and Gold are gonna help maximize those opportunities.
Yeah, it's a great point because I like Gold last year shot 37% from three. Parham was 28, but I do think like he's capable of better, and I think they have to respect it, right? He was almost making one a game at the end of the day. You can't just leave him, because I'd like to think if you just leave him, he is a Division I shooter, right? And has shown the ability to knock it down, right? So I think that floor spacing will be key. And then I think, there are some other okay shooting pieces around. Like you said, they're more downhill than not, but like Chase Ross shot it pretty well in first career. He's 35%, not on like super high volume, but this year he's probably going to have higher volume. 104 attempts last year, 69 the year before. Obviously wants to get to the rim before anything else. But Sean Jones, not so much a shooter, but then you have guys like Zayd Lowry, who again, small volume, 56 attempts last year, but was 37%. Demarius Owens, low volume, but 34.5%. So I am intrigued by the floor spacing of this team and what it will look like. I think that, you're going to have opportunities for guys to be forced to make shots, especially because the front court can space things out, because they're going to have to give something up, right? Because the guards are going to be, like you said, attacking downhill. And I think they're going to be successful at that. So they're going to have to give something up. And I think that some of these guards and wings alongside Ross and Jones do have some intriguing upside as floor spacers, with more volume, right? Especially for me, like a guy like Zayd Lowry. I think he was 21 for 56 last year from three. I think he is a very intriguing piece, to do a little bit of everything, knock down shots to get to the rim. He's going to have a much greater chance for opportunity this year than years prior, right? Because nobody came in the portal. They have 4 freshmen who it looks like some of them can maybe provide some shooting for this team, but it's hard to say at this point like what their roles are really going to look like because the roster retention was so great outside of the guys that graduated. So I am intrigued. I think the floor spacing is a big deal, and I think the freshman class will eventually be solid. Shaka typically does a pretty good job recruiting and finding guys that can be impactful players for him. Not necessarily this year, but for 2, 3, 4 years. So I do believe in Shaka and what he's trying to do. Obviously, it's a bit more unorthodox in today's college basketball landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to have to be some sort of a hidden gem on this roster, and I do think Zayd Lowry is most capable of that sort of breakout. And like for that freshman class, like Shaka, I mean, yeah, he loves bringing in guys who are like the roster retention. He likes to put guys back into his rotation that he saw play a role the year before. He doesn't trust his freshmen necessarily a ton. Like I think at the very most, these guys play spot minutes. Maybe one of them breaks out into somewhat of an not on-ball star, but a productive enough on the ball to play more of a role than past Shaka Smart freshmen.
Yeah, I mean he doesn't typically like to play freshmen. You even look at a guy like Ben Gold. Granted, he had Oso Iguodaro in front of him, but he played 20% of the minutes. So again, kind of spot minutes. Played 8 minutes a game as a freshman and played in 36 games. But I think that's probably what we will see a little bit with those freshmen, depending on which ones do crack the rotation. It will be somewhere in that like 6 to 10 minute ballpark. Trying to, I think more for Shaka to get comfortable enough with them so that next year when, the roster turns over again a little bit and you lose Chase Ross and Ben Gold, you have a little bit more comfortability playing those guys. In terms of weaknesses, Cody, what do you see? Obviously they lose Kam Jones, one of the best players in the country, one of the top scorers. So there is like some element here of like missing star power of a guy that you can really trust to go get you a bucket.
Yeah, and that's kind of the main concern. I think it's how I had it listed it's just a severe lack of talent compared to the recent past of Marquette teams. And this is the downside of not using the portal. I think maybe Smart is a little too stingent, or lack of a better term. He's just not really willing to use the portal all that much. And I think this is where it hurts him at the end of the day. It hurts the ceiling of this team. As good as their defense and maybe their ball handling might be, you need somewhat of a star to have any sort of ceiling. And it doesn't appear that there's going to be a guy like a Tyler Kolek, Kam Jones, Iguodaro, or even like a guy like Omax Prosper on this roster. And it's just going to cap the upside in general. I do think Chase Ross is ready to slide into a more prominent role, and he made some real strides as a shooter last season. I was never high on him as a shooter, and last year he proved me wrong for a large part of the season. And I think his downhill burst is going to help open some things up, but I just don't think he's anywhere near the level of what Tyler Kolek or Kam Jones were as creators for themselves and for others. And Sean Jones is going to handle a lot of the on-ball duties as well, but he's a more defensive-minded, pass-first guy that is pretty limited as a scorer and creator in general. And yeah, we mentioned the potential breakout from a guy like Lowry, maybe even Demarius Owens or Trey Norman, but I'm just not all that high on those guys really breaking out into this team reaching any sort of ceiling like they had the last 2 years. Like I don't think a 2 or 3 seed is really in the realm of possibility with this roster.
Yeah. It's completely true, right? with the talent that's been through there and left over the last couple of years, it's especially where Shaka doesn't use the portal, it was bound to kind of hit this point, right, where you're looking around like who's going to be the guy, and it probably has to be Chase Ross. But this isn't so much a weakness for me as it is a concern of like, you're depending a lot on growth from within, right? You're depending a lot on which, Shaka has shown the ability to do, but at the same time, like it's much more of a gamble in today's college basketball world than it is, going out and getting like proven perimeter depth and proven front court depth, that can provide stuff on both ends for you. So you're really relying on your development system. I think it shows like a lot of confidence in Shaka and his staff, that they believe they can do it, right? They can get their guys up to speed and get them playing good basketball by the time the end of the season comes, or it's just Shaka is stingy, right? And doesn't want to give in to this idea of the NIL and paying a bunch of guys through the portal and getting into bidding wars for guys. So maybe it's a little bit of both. But I do have a concern of like just so much of this team relying on growth from within. Even for, you've got 4 freshmen coming in. That's all you've got coming in. You're depending on your development system over the course of this summer, not only getting the guys that are returning that didn't play big roles up to speed and, being ready for big roles, but also getting these freshmen to a point where maybe they can contribute spot minutes. So it's definitely a concern in the offensive end with, really Ross and Sean Jones, who's an undersized guard. He's coming back off an ACL. So there's just a lot of uncertainty here. While I do have some belief in some of these guys that could break out, it's no sure thing, right? It very easily could be like a year where Marquette's just not very good, and Marquette fans are not happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more stubbornness from Smart not using the portal. I understand he wants to tap into, having a really good culture and, embracing the underdog mentality night in and night out. And, that can win you some big games, but that can only take you so far, in my opinion. Like when motivation is equal in a tournament in the NCAA tournament, I don't see how you can really embrace the underdog mentality and like outwill another team because, motivation is equal. Both teams are obviously going to be giving 110%. And it's just that type of style can only go so far. And, you had a guy like Matt Painter who has never really loved to use the portal, but he's gone out and used it in spots where he believes that he needs to, like a guy like Lance Jones a couple of years ago was like the final piece of the puzzle to get that team in the national championship conversation or to actually allow them to reach a national championship. And then this year bringing in a guy like Oscar Clough, like filling the need of rim protection. And I think at some point that's the direction Smart needs to go. Maybe he doesn't need to, spend $2 or $3 million on one particular star, but grabbing guys that you might need is going to be important.
Yeah. Now on the defensive side of the ball, obviously Smart's style has always been like pressure, wing intensity, wing switchability, and forcing turnovers, right? And this is, another team I think that will have some ability to do that, right? I think it might not be as dominant or as effective as in years past, especially if they're going to play Gold and Parham together as much. But I think guys like Chase Ross, who is really good on the defensive end, can really impact and make plays. Sean Jones can make plays and be kind of a pest on the defensive end. And then the more uncertain pieces, right, in this puzzle, Zayd Lowry, right, he showed 2.5% steal rate last year. He was effective as a defender. I think like the backcourt group can be effective still in Shaka Smart's system.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's kind of what I had written down as my main strength is turnover forcing. It's been the MO for Shaka Smart teams for years, honestly. I mean, not really at Texas, but I think he got back to like his VCU style of havoc here at Marquette, and his teams have been top 20 in turnover rate forced nationally in each of the last 3 seasons, and I think he has the personnel to do it again. You mentioned Sean Jones and Chase Ross; they're ball hawks, and they're going to be really good recovery defenders this year with more time and more responsibility. And I think Shaka Smart has filled out this roster with the same type of mold on the perimeter. I mean, Chase Ross, like he's 6'5". He's listed at 6'5", which actually surprises me a little bit. He doesn't really look that big, but he also possesses a 2.5% block rate last season, and he made some real highlight plays on this end. And you mentioned guys like Sade Lowry and Trey Norman. I think they're quick twitch wings that I think can have a real impact on this end. They didn't play massive roles last year, but I think with more time and sliding into more prominent roles, I think they're going to be just fine. And I think this is where the freshmen can make an impact right away. Adrian Stevens, Nigel James, Michael Phillips, and then there are absolutely other pieces fit the archetype for Shaka Smart. I think they're more defense-driven guards from the small amount of film that I've seen. So, and I think this is the side of the ball that will remain a certainty. Didn't use the portal to grab offensive talent, but I think the culture and the motivation that this team is going to bring night in and night out is going to, they're going to reap the benefits more on the defensive end than they are on offense.
Yeah, I agree. I think Chase Ross is going to be one of the best, if not the best, perimeter defender in the Big East. Like he should be a really impactful player on that end, right? Both, as you said, as a shot blocker too, but as a creating steals and opportunities in transition for a team that likes to kind of play in transition and play fast. So they should be able to generate some offense out of their defense, where the half-court offense is maybe a little bit more uncertain, at least the pieces around, as primary creators. But as for weaknesses on the defensive end, obviously I think the concern is pretty much the same as last year, right? We touched on it a lot early in the year last year with, Ben Gold being the front court option, and they struggled on the defensive glass. They struggled really like in rim protection. There's not a ton of front court depth. So I think yet again here, the front court is the weakness of this defense.
Yeah, I would absolutely say so. I think, that's what I had listed as primary rim protection, defensive rebounding. But I think the heavy paint denial, like rim swarming defense will help mask this, as I think the wing and guard depth is really going to be able to provide an impact. If you're able to turn a team over before they get to the rim, I think that's kind of what Shaka Smart teams are looking for. And I mean, Marquette last year, they actually allowed a pretty high volume of attempts at the rim, but I think they defend it pretty well as a committee. I mean, they allowed 37% of opponents' field goal attempts to come at the rim, which was 6th percentile. They actually defended it at a pretty competent level as a committee, 60th percentile in field goal percentage allowed. And I think a similar front court group is going to allow for a similar outcome. But at the end of the day, in certain matchups, I do think it's going to become a problem. Like teams that can take care of the ball, teams that can work through the post, I think, and teams that have, I think, pretty competent lob threats, I think is going to give this Marquette front court some problems. And then teams that can attack the offensive glass are really going to be able to take advantage of Marquette as well.
Yeah, no doubt. It's certainly an issue, was an issue last year a little bit, and I think will be again. So, much should be the same on the defensive end. Force a bunch of turnovers, but then potentially struggle on the back line a little bit. But moving into MVP, X factor, who do you have here?
Yeah, I think the MVP was pretty clear cut. I went with Chase Ross. I just think he's going to be receiving most of the on-ball usage, average 10.5 points per game, 2 assists per game on an offense that, had Kam Jones and Stevie Mitchell and David Joplin. And I just think he's there's a potential for him to even play 35 minutes per game if he doesn't run into foul trouble. And I think there's a real opportunity for him to average 15 plus. So, and his impact on the defensive end is going to be too large to not make him the MVP. X factor, I went with Zayd Lowry. I think there needs to be a number 2 wing or guard to really help out Ross, because I'm not like overly excited about him being the primary perimeter creator. So I do think a guy like Zayd Lowry needs to break out if Marquette wants to even get close to where their past offenses have finished, at least in the past couple seasons. So yeah, I went with Ross and Lowry as my MVP X factor.
Yeah, I went the same direction for pretty much similar reasons. Again, Lowry for me is a guy I have been looking at all offseason as a guy who could break out. I like him, as potentially a shooter, but also as a guy that can put it on the deck. I think there's a lot of versatility in his offensive game that hasn't been tapped into yet. So I think we're going to see a year 3 leap, and for Marquette's sake, they need him to do that. I think if they want to reach, what they're hoping for, and then like you said, Chase Ross, not much more needs to be said about him. On both ends of the floor, as a guy that can impact on the defensive end, and just be a ball hawk, like you said. That's the perfect way of putting it. And then on the offensive end, he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. So I think 15 points is certainly attainable for him with as much as he's going to play and as much as is going to be on his plate. So, I think he should have a very good season to wrap up his career at Marquette. Now, in terms of ceiling floor for this team and then bold prediction, where are you at with that?
Yeah, my ceiling was 3rd or 4th in the Big East. I don't really think they have the true upside to dethrone UConn or St. John's again. So, and I had them as like an 8 or 9 seed in the tournament if their defense is like a top 15 to 20 unit again, and the offense is able to have some competence at least at the power conference level. I could see them playing in that 8-9 game again, like they did 3 years ago, I believe. I believe it was 3 years ago. And then I had their floor I had it at 7th or 8th in the Big East. I just think there are avenues for this offense to really run into some trouble with the lack of talent, and this team misses the postseason entirely. And for my bold prediction, I said Chase Ross averages 17 points per game. I think there's a real avenue for this to happen. I mean, I know he played a lot of minutes last season and only got to 10.5, but there's a lot of talent out the window. And if there isn't another perimeter guy that breaks out, I think Ross is going to have to take a lot of shots, probably a lot more shots than Shaka Smart would like, but he might get to 17 or 18. It might not be all that efficient, but I do think he can get to that number pretty easily.
Yeah. For me, I said ceiling at the 3 seed, floor at the 8. I think even if they are the 3 seed, though, this was the note I made. If they're the 3 seed in the Big East, I think there's a world where they could potentially live on the bubble. Just because I think the Big East is a lot weaker this year. So I think that there is a world where there are 2 teams from the Big East that get in the tournament, and everyone else just kind of like beats up on each other, and Marquette finishes 3rd. But there's not a ton of I don't really see this team as a team that's going to beat UConn or St. John's. Maybe at best they go 1-3. So that's just my concern, because like if you're going to beat Seton Hall and Butler twice and DePaul and Georgetown, it's just like I don't know if there's enough quality wins out there. Like there probably is, but I think that it kind of puts them on the bubble, even if they're at the top end of like their ceiling. And then floor, I said 8th as well. Just like the offense is a concern, right? They should be able to force some turnovers, or plenty of them, but on the offensive end, particularly in the half court, if they do sputter, it's where they could end up being, I think. And then bold prediction, I'm going to kind of ride the Zayd Lowry wave here. He's going to break out, average 12 points a game. So 8-point per game jump for him in his 3rd year at Marquette.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's something that needs to happen if they want to be in the tournament conversation. And yeah, it's a good point about, there's a real chance that this is only a 2-bid league. I think it ends up being 3 bids just because there's probably going to be one team that emerges and beats both UConn and St. John's once, and that those are elevating enough wins to get you into the tournament. All they have to do is kind of hold serve throughout the rest of the Big East.
Yeah, makes sense. So we'll wrap things up. Thanks everyone for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.